Well, surprisingly, I'm going to do part 4 as a continuation this evening because there's something that's been pressing on my mind. Actually, two things that I need to bring forth. COVID, or Corona, as we call it here in Finland, has been killing Americans in record numbers, as you all know. What many of you don't know is that many of those victims are people who are living in the most isolated places on the planet, prisons. If you read correctional news, as I do, which is to say the way that prisons communicate, or wardens or correctional employees communicate with each other, or for that matter the contractors, the many subcontractors and contractors that work within the prison industry, and yes, it is an industry, you will read daily reports of prisoners dying from COVID. And it is a sad truth that very few reporters are reporting on the fact that prisoners are not given adequate access to hygiene, to masks. They'll probably be the very last people on the list to be vaccinated. I don't even doubt it for a second. In addition, surprisingly, the New York Times did report on the fact that Indian country is losing the elders at absolutely astounding rates. Something that really breaks my heart, including some of the the elders of and the leaders of the American Indian movement. I've mentioned Leonard Peltier before. He has now been in prison for over 40 years and is over 70 or 70 something, and actually I think he's now nearing, is it almost 50 years of incarceration? In any case, it is an incredibly long period of time. And he, of course, was, again, no question about it. If you read any of the materials, extensive materials, documentaries, books that have been written about the case, the FBI itself has no idea who killed those 2 FBI agents on the res that day, where Leonard Peltier was trying to protect the property of an elder, along with some of his other fellow AIM brethren. He was very young at the time. And yet and still, he serves as an example. In great part, the police brutality related to the crack epidemic began with the murder of a police officer in his car on the East Coast, ostensibly by crack drug dealers. And the politicians at the time and the Wall of Blue at the time decided that they had to make an example out of all communities of color, essentially, and especially Black communities. But I need to say this. This isn't a competition as to who's suffering the most in America. You'll hear me oftentimes reference Black and Brown and African Americans and the degree to which they as a community have suffered disproportionately within the prison system. And there's no question about that. It's still true that 1 in 3 Black men will end up in jail or prison at some point in his lifetime, and that a Black man is more likely to end up in jail or prison than to go to college. But I do need to emphasize that once you're in the prison and you walk the yard, you notice very quickly that you are essentially witnessing the warehousing of the poor. So let me emphasize here that in my years visiting prisons, I met prisoners from all walks of life. Chicanas, Native Americans, both urban Indians, and men and women who had primarily been raised in Indian country. Native Americans are actually disproportionately represented to a greater degree in a plethora of states than any other ethnic group. And one of the reasons why people don't think about Native Americans and incarceration that much is because numerically their numbers are so small in the United States at this point. Thank you, U.S. genocide. I say that very tongue-in-cheek, obviously. And I need for people to understand that there are Euro-Americans also suffering in these isolation units and solitary confinement. There are Arab Americans. There are people from all walks of life in prison, in jail, and in these isolation units. So if you hear me talking about one particular community or another, it's by no means any kind of a competition. It's a sad truth and a sad reality that the system was set up to essentially hold the overflow. The people that could not be or would not be employed or treated fairly in a fundamentally, economically, and socially unjust and racist society. And until America as a nation is willing to face up to what it has done and the brutality that prisoners experience on a daily basis, it will not be able to move forward. I maintain that mass incarceration is the single greatest civil rights issue of present-day America. I know I'm hardly alone in that thought. And again, I implore you, if you have never had the opportunity to speak with someone who has done time, if you think that the cases of police brutality that you've heard of and seen on the streets that inspired the Black Lives Matter movement, take the time to talk to someone who's done time, and they will tell you that they see those kinds of things on the yard and at the hands of COs or correctional officers on a daily basis. And when we're talking about people in isolation, we're talking about some of the most extreme forms of brutality that you will ever hear of. More later. Thank you for listening. Good night and peace out from Finland.